in the dimly lit corners of the most exclusive gentlemen's club in Manhattan, where leather-bound books lined mahogany shelves and crystal decanters caught the amber glow of afternoon light, Marcus Aurelius Chen sat motionless in his favorite chair. The irony of his name was not lost on him. His parents, in their infinite wisdom, had named him after the great Stoic emperor, perhaps knowing that he would one day embody the very principles that made men legends. At 32, Marcus had achieved what most men could only dream of: a multi-million-dollar tech empire, penthouse apartments in 3 major cities, and a reputation that preceded him into every room he entered. Yet it wasn't his wealth that commanded respect. It was something far more intangible, far more powerful. It was his complete and utter indifference to the very things that drove other men to desperation. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. 5 years earlier, Marcus had been a different man entirely. Desperate, needy, chasing validation like a starving dog chases scraps. He remembered the taste of rejection, the sting of unanswered messages, the hollow ache of watching others receive what he so desperately craved. That version of himself now felt like a stranger, a weak ghost that he had systematically destroyed through fire and discipline. The club's heavy oak doors swung open, and in walked Victoria Blackwood, the kind of woman who could silence a room with her presence. Editor-in-chief of the city's most influential magazine, she possessed the rare combination of devastating beauty and sharp intellect that had brought countless powerful men to their knees. Her eyes swept the room with predatory precision until they landed on Marcus, who didn't so much as glance up from his newspaper. "Marcus Chen," she said, her voice carrying across the room like silk wrapping around steel. "I've been hoping to run into you." He turned a page of the Financial Times with deliberate slowness, as if her words were merely background noise competing with the rustle of paper. This wasn't calculated disrespect. It was something deeper, more authentic. He genuinely found his newspaper more engaging than her attempt at conversation, and this complete lack of reaction sent ripples of confusion across her perfectly composed features. Victoria was accustomed to men stumbling over themselves in her presence, offering drinks they couldn't afford, boasting about achievements they'd inflated, desperately trying to capture even a fragment of her attention. But Marcus existed in a different realm entirely, one where her approval or disapproval held no more weight than the opinion of a stranger on the street. She approached his chair with the confidence of a woman who had never been denied anything she truly wanted. "I heard about your latest acquisition. Quite impressive." Marcus murmured, still not looking up. The sound wasn't dismissive. It was the natural response of a man whose attention was genuinely elsewhere. He folded his newspaper with methodical precision, placed it on the side table, and finally met her gaze with eyes that held no hunger, no desperation, no hidden agenda. "Victoria Blackwood," she introduced herself, extending a manicured hand. "I know who you are," Marcus replied simply, shaking her hand with the same casual courtesy he might show a business acquaintance. No lingering touch, no attempt to impress, no subtle invitation for more contact. Just basic human politeness, nothing more, nothing less. The absence of any romantic or sexual tension from his side created a vacuum that she found herself unconsciously trying to fill. This was the first principle of the Machiavellian law in action. When a man truly doesn't chase, when his self-worth isn't tied to external validation, he becomes the center of gravitational pull rather than another satellite desperately orbiting someone else's attention. As Victoria settled into the chair across from him, she found herself doing something she rarely did, working to maintain a conversation with a man who seemed perfectly content with silence. "Your company's latest AI development has been making waves in our industry circles." Marcus nodded slightly, acknowledging her comment without the eager expansion that most men would provide. He wasn't being rude or mysterious for effect. He simply saw no need to perform or peacock. His accomplishments spoke for themselves, and he felt no compulsion to dress them up with elaborate explanations or false modesty. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable for Marcus, but Victoria felt it like pressure against her eardrums. She had built her career on her ability to command conversations, to lead and direct the flow of social interaction. Yet here was a man who seemed completely immune to her gravitational pull, existing in his own orbit with such complete self-possession that her usual tactics felt suddenly obsolete. "Are you always this mysterious?" she asked with a slight smile, deploying a line that had cracked the shells of countless confident men. "I'm not mysterious," Marcus replied with genuine confusion. "I'm just myself." This simple statement contained multitudes. It spoke to a level of self-acceptance and inner security that most people spend their entire lives seeking. Marcus wasn't playing hard to get. He was simply being authentic to his nature, which had been forged through years of deliberate self-destruction and reconstruction. The transformation had begun during what he now thought of as his breaking point. 5 years earlier, he had been what modern dating culture might call a nice guy, eager to please, quick to adapt his personality to what he thought others wanted, constantly seeking validation through romantic conquest. He had chased women with the desperate energy of a man trying to fill a void, only to watch them lose interest the moment they sensed his neediness. The breaking point came on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening when he found himself standing outside an ex-girlfriend's apartment building, having driven across town in traffic just to bump into her casually. As he stood there, soaked and pathetic, watching her laugh with another man through her window, something fundamental shifted inside him. He saw himself clearly for the first time. A grown man reduced to stalker-like behavior by his own desperate need for external validation. That night, Marcus made a decision that would reshape his entire existence. He would destroy this weak version of himself systematically, methodically, without mercy. Not to become someone else, but to uncover who he truly was beneath all the accumulated layers of societal programming and self-doubt. The process had been brutal. He spent months in deliberate isolation, cutting off all romantic pursuits, declining social invitations, and focusing exclusively on building his inner foundation. He read philosophy, not to impress women at cocktail parties, but to genuinely understand the nature of human existence and his place within it. He trained his body not to attract mates, but to feel powerful and capable in his own skin. He built his business not to display wealth, but to create value and express his authentic talents. Most importantly, he learned to be alone without being lonely. This distinction was crucial. Loneliness was a state of lacking, a desperate reaching for external completion. Solitude, by contrast, was a state of fullness, of being so complete within oneself that company became a luxury rather than a necessity. The old Marcus had approached relationships from a position of scarcity, desperately trying to prove his worth, terrified of rejection, willing to compromise his values for the smallest crumb of affection. The new Marcus approached life from a position of abundance, not material abundance, though that followed naturally, but emotional and spiritual abundance. He had become his own source of validation, his own judge of worth, his own provider of security. This internal transformation had external consequences that he hadn't expected. People began gravitating toward him with an intensity that initially surprised him. Women who had previously ignored him started finding excuses to be in his vicinity. Business opportunities materialized as if by magic. Invitations to exclusive events arrived regularly, all because he had stopped seeking these things desperately. The Machiavellian law wasn't about manipulation or games. It was about natural human psychology. People are drawn to completeness, to self-possession, to the kind of inner security that can't be faked or manufactured. When someone truly doesn't need your approval, your attention, your validation, they become infinitely more attractive than someone who clearly does. Victoria found herself leaning forward slightly in her chair, unconsciously closing the distance between them. I have tickets to the Morrison Gallery opening tomorrow night. Very exclusive. Would you be interested in attending? Marcus considered the invitation with the same casual attention he might give to choosing between two equally appealing lunch options. I might stop by, he said eventually. I'd been meaning to see Morrison's new work. Not, I'd love to go with you. Not, what time should I pick you up? Just a simple acknowledgement that he might attend based on his own interest in the art, with her invitation being incidental to his decision-making process. This response created a cognitive dissonance in Victoria's mind. Her invitation had been a gift, an entry into her world, an opportunity to be seen with her, a chance to network with influential people she knew personally. Yet Marcus received it as casually as he might receive information about the weather, processing it through the lens of his own interests rather than the social opportunity it represented. As the afternoon wore on, their conversation meandered through topics of mutual interest: art, business, philosophy, with Marcus contributing thoughtfully but never performing. He didn't try to impress her with his knowledge, didn't name-drop his connections, didn't steer the conversation toward his achievements. He simply engaged authentically, speaking when he had something valuable to contribute, and remaining silent when he didn't. This authentic engagement was perhaps the most seductive quality of all. Victoria had spent years surrounded by men who treated conversations with her as auditions, who carefully crafted their responses to showcase their intelligence, wealth, or charm. Marcus spoke to her as he would speak to anyone, with respect, but without the desperate undercurrent of someone trying to win something from her. When Victoria finally excused herself to leave for another appointment, she lingered beside his chair for a moment longer than necessary. "It was refreshing to meet you, Marcus." He stood to shake her hand goodbye, the same polite courtesy he had shown upon meeting her. "Likewise. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon." As she walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor, Victoria felt something she rarely experienced: uncertainty. She couldn't quite categorize Marcus or predict his behavior, and this unpredictability was deeply intriguing to a woman accustomed to reading men like open books. Marcus settled back into his chair and retrieved his newspaper, genuinely unbothered by her departure. This wasn't calculated indifference. He simply felt no need to watch her leave, no compulsion to analyze their interaction for signs of interest or rejection. He had enjoyed their conversation, found her intelligent and engaging, but felt no desperate need to pursue her or secure her approval. This complete absence of neediness was the foundation of everything that followed. The old Marcus would have spent the next hour replaying their conversation, analyzing her body language, crafting the perfect text message to send later that evening. The new Marcus simply returned to his newspaper, his mind already shifting to other matters of genuine interest. The next evening, Marcus did indeed attend the Morrison Gallery opening, arriving fashionably late in a perfectly tailored dark suit that whispered rather than shouted its quality. He moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in any environment, stopping to examine paintings that genuinely captured his interest, rather than positioning himself strategically for maximum social visibility. Victoria spotted him from across the room and felt an unexpected flutter of anticipation. She was deep in conversation with the mayor's wife and a prominent tech investor, but found her attention repeatedly drifting to Marcus as he studied a particularly provocative piece in the corner. He seemed completely absorbed in the artwork, oblivious to the social dynamics swirling around him. This genuine engagement with art, rather than using the gallery as a networking opportunity, set him apart from every other man in the room. While others posed with wine glasses and business cards, Marcus actually looked at the paintings, spending several minutes with each piece that interested him, moving through the space at his own pace rather than working the room systematically. "Excuse me," Victoria said to her companions. "I need to check on something." She approached Marcus as he stood before a large abstract painting, his expression thoughtful and engaged. "What do you think?" she asked. "Morrison's use of negative space has evolved," Marcus replied without turning around. "This piece suggests influences from his time in Japan, but filtered through a distinctly Western sensibility. The tension between restraint and expression is fascinating." Victoria found herself genuinely interested in his analysis rather than simply using art as a conversational vehicle. This was another crucial aspect of the Machiavellian law. When a man pursues his authentic interests without regard for social positioning, he becomes infinitely more compelling than someone obviously playing a role. "You seem to know his work well," she observed. "I've been following his career for about 7 years, Marcus said, finally turning to face her. "I actually own 2 of his earlier pieces." He mentioned this fact casually, without the subtle bragging that typically accompanied such revelations. For Marcus, collecting art was simply something he enjoyed, not a way to demonstrate wealth or sophistication. This authentic relationship with his own interests made him seem grounded and real in a room full of people performing various versions of success. As the evening progressed, Victoria found herself staying near Marcus as he moved through the gallery, ostensibly mingling with other guests but repeatedly returning to continue their conversations about the artwork. She introduced him to several influential people in her circle, and each time, Marcus engaged politely but without the eager networking energy that characterized most people's behavior at such events. "Marcus, you must meet Catherine Williams," Victoria said, approaching a silver-haired woman who controlled several major art foundations. "Catherine, this is Marcus Chen, the founder of Quantum Dynamics." Catherine extended her hand with the regal bearing of someone accustomed to deference. "Ah, Mr. Chen, I've heard impressive things about your work in artificial intelligence." "Thank you," Marcus replied simply, shaking her hand with respectful attention but no excessive enthusiasm. He didn't launch into an elevator pitch about his company or try to leverage this introduction into a business opportunity. He simply acknowledged her comment and waited to see if she had genuine interest in continuing the conversation. This restraint had a magnetic effect, Catherine found herself asking follow-up questions, genuinely curious about his work rather than making polite conversation before moving on to the next introduction. Marcus answered her questions thoughtfully but briefly, never overselling or trying to impress her with technical jargon. "Your approach to machine learning ethics is quite refreshing," Catherine said. "So many in your field seem to rush toward innovation without considering broader implications. Technology without wisdom is just sophisticated destruction," Marcus replied. "The real challenge isn't building systems that can think, but building systems that can think responsibly." This philosophical depth, delivered without pretension or performance, captivated both women. Here was a man who had clearly thought deeply about his work and its place in the world, but felt no need to demonstrate his intelligence through elaborate explanations or name-dropping academic credentials. As the evening wound down, Victoria walked with Marcus toward the gallery's entrance. The crowd was thinning, and the energy was shifting from networking intensity to more relaxed conversations among those who remained. "I'm having a small dinner party next Saturday," Victoria said as they reached the coat check. "Very intimate. Just 8 people. Would you be interested in joining us?" Marcus considered the invitation with the same thoughtful attention he had given to the artwork. "What's the occasion?" "No particular occasion. I enjoy bringing together interesting people for good conversation." "That sounds appealing," Marcus said. "Send me the details." Again, his response contained no excessive enthusiasm, no immediate acceptance that might suggest he had been waiting for such an invitation. He simply evaluated the offer based on whether it genuinely interested him and responded accordingly. Victoria found this measured response both frustrating and fascinating. She was accustomed to men who jumped at any opportunity to spend time with her, who rearranged their schedules and cancelled other commitments to accommodate her invitations. Marcus treated her dinner party as he might treat any social invitation, something to consider based on his genuine interest and availability. As they retrieved their coats, Victoria made one more attempt to gauge his interest. "The conversation tends to be quite stimulating at these dinners. Last month we had a fascinating discussion about the intersection of technology and human consciousness. Sounds like the kind of evening I'd enjoy," Marcus replied, slipping into his coat with fluid efficiency. "I'll look forward to it." He said goodbye with the same polite courtesy that had characterized their entire interaction, neither lingering for extended farewells nor rushing to escape her presence. He simply acknowledged the end of their evening together and departed, leaving Victoria standing in the gallery's entrance with a feeling she couldn't quite identify. The week that followed saw Victoria thinking about Marcus more than she cared to admit. She found herself analysing their conversations, trying to understand what made him so different from other men in her orbit. It wasn't his success. She knew many successful men. It wasn't his intelligence. Her social circle was full of brilliant people. It was something more fundamental. His complete self-possession, his apparent immunity to the social dynamics that governed everyone else's behavior. Saturday evening arrived with Victoria feeling an unusual nervousness as she prepared for her dinner party. She had chosen her guests carefully. A renowned architect, a celebrated novelist, a Supreme Court justice, a prominent venture capitalist, an acclaimed filmmaker, and a world-class surgeon. These were people accustomed to being the most accomplished person in any room, yet she found herself most curious about how Marcus would navigate these dynamics. Marcus arrived precisely on time, carrying a bottle of wine that spoke to good taste rather than ostentation, a thoughtful gesture without being excessive. He greeted Victoria with the same warm but measured courtesy that had characterized all their interactions, acknowledging the elegance of her apartment without gushing compliments that might feel calculated. "This is beautiful," he said, looking around her living space with genuine appreciation. "The way you've combined modern pieces with classical elements creates an interesting dialogue." His observation was specific and thoughtful, demonstrating real attention rather than generic flattery. Victoria felt a warm satisfaction at his approval, then immediately wondered why his opinion seemed to matter so much to her. As other guests arrived, Victoria introduced Marcus into the group dynamics with subtle anticipation. She was curious to see how he would position himself among such accomplished individuals, whether he would compete for attention or defer to their established reputations. Marcus did neither. He engaged with each person as an individual, asking thoughtful questions about their work without trying to demonstrate his own knowledge or achievements. When the architect mentioned a recent project in Dubai, Marcus asked about the cultural considerations that influenced the design rather than mentioning his own international business dealings. When the novelist discussed her latest book, He inquired about her research process rather than recommending books from his own library. This genuine curiosity about others, combined with his own quiet confidence, created a fascinating dynamic at the dinner table. People found themselves opening up to Marcus in ways they rarely did at social gatherings, sharing not just their professional accomplishments but their actual thoughts and concerns about their work. "The challenge isn't technical," the Supreme Court Justice was saying over the main course. "The challenge is maintaining human wisdom while processing unprecedented volumes of information. How do we ensure that efficiency doesn't override justice?" Marcus nodded thoughtfully before responding. Perhaps the question isn't how to make justice more efficient, but how to ensure efficiency serves justice rather than replacing it. His contribution to the conversation was substantive without being dominating, thoughtful without being pretentious. He engaged with the justice's concern on its own terms rather than trying to redirect attention to his own expertise. Victoria watched this interaction with growing fascination. Marcus seemed to bring out the best in everyone around the table, creating space for genuine dialogue rather than the competitive intellectual sparring that often characterized dinner parties among high achievers. As the evening progressed, she noticed something remarkable. Marcus had become the gravitational center of the conversation without any apparent effort to claim that position. People directed their comments toward him, built on his observations, and seemed energized by his responses. Yet he never held the floor for extended periods or tried to dominate the discussion. This was the Machiavellian law, operating at its highest level. Leadership through authentic presence rather than aggressive assertion. Marcus commanded attention by being genuinely worth attending to, not by demanding or manipulating focus onto himself. During a brief lull in conversation as the wine was being refilled, the filmmaker leaned toward Marcus. "I've been thinking about your earlier comment regarding wisdom and technology. I'm working on a documentary about artificial intelligence, and I'd love to get your perspective on camera sometime. I'd be happy to contribute if you think it would be valuable," Marcus replied. "Though I'd suggest talking to some of the ethicists working in this space as well. They often have insights that those of us building the technology might miss." Even when offered an opportunity for professional exposure and recognition, Marcus remained focused on what would serve the project rather than what would benefit him personally. This selfless approach to opportunities made him even more attractive to everyone present. As guests began to depart around midnight, Marcus thanked Victoria for an excellent evening with the same genuine warmth he had shown throughout the night. The conversation was exceptional. "You have a gift for bringing together people who can actually listen to each other." "I'm glad you enjoyed it," Victoria replied, walking him to the door. "I hope we can do this again sometime." "I'd like that," Marcus said simply, meaning it without any hidden agenda or calculation about future possibilities. After he left, Victoria found herself alone in her apartment with an unusual feeling of incompleteness. The evening had been a tremendous success, with several guests commenting on the quality of conversation and asking to be included in future gatherings. Yet she felt oddly unsettled, as if something important remained unfinished. Over the following weeks, Victoria found herself thinking about Marcus with increasing frequency. She would catch herself checking her phone for messages from him that never came, wondering what he was doing, considering excuses to contact him. This pattern was entirely foreign to her experience. Typically, men pursued her with varying degrees of subtlety and persistence, while she maintained the comfortable position of choosing whether to encourage or discourage their attention. With Marcus, the dynamic was completely reversed. Not because he was playing games or deliberately withholding attention, but because he genuinely didn't seem to need anything from her. He had enjoyed their interactions, appreciated her company, and would presumably be happy to see her again. But he felt no compulsion to manufacture opportunities for contact. This absence of pursuit created a vacuum that Victoria found herself unconsciously trying to fill. She began attending events where she might encounter him, accepting invitations to gatherings where his presence was possible, even adjusting her schedule around activities that aligned with his known interests. The realization of her own behavior came as a shock. Victoria Blackwood, who had never chased a man in her life, was essentially stalking someone through the social calendar of Manhattan's elite. The irony was not lost on her. By completely failing to chase her, Marcus had transformed her into the pursuer. 3 weeks after the dinner party, Victoria finally manufactured an excuse to contact him directly. She texted him about an art exhibition that featured work similar to the Morrison pieces they had discussed, framing it as sharing information rather than extending an invitation. Marcus responded several hours later, Thanks for letting me know. Morrison's influences are fascinating to track. Hope you're well. His response was friendly, but contained no invitation to attend together, no suggestion that they discuss it further, no opening for extended conversation. It was simply a polite acknowledgement of her message. Nothing more, nothing less. Victoria stared at the text for longer than she cared to admit, analyzing it for hidden meanings or subtle invitations that weren't there. This man had somehow rewired her entire approach to romantic interaction without appearing to make any effort whatsoever. That evening, as she sat in her own apartment surrounded by symbols of her success and independence, Victoria experienced something she hadn't felt in years: genuine vulnerability. Not the performed vulnerability that served social purposes, but the raw uncertainty of not knowing where she stood with someone whose opinion had somehow become important to her. The next morning brought clarity along with her first cup of coffee. Victoria realized that her attraction to Marcus wasn't simply about his unavailability. It was about his authenticity. In a world where everyone performed various versions of themselves for social advantage, Marcus simply existed as himself, taking or leaving opportunities based on his genuine interest rather than strategic positioning. This authentic self-possession was intoxicating to someone who had spent her career navigating the careful performances required for success in her industry. Marcus represented something she had forgotten was possible: the freedom to be genuinely oneself without calculation or compromise. The revelation led to a decision that surprised her with its boldness. Rather than continuing to engineer coincidental meetings or manufacture excuses for contact, Victoria chose directness, a quality she had always valued in business, but rarely applied to her personal life. She called Marcus that evening, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit as the phone rang. When he answered with his characteristic warm but measured greeting, she felt momentarily tongue-tied. Another foreign experience for someone renowned for her communication skills. "Marcus, this is Victoria. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "Not at all. How are you, Victoria?" The genuine interest in his voice, without any undertone of surprise or calculation, helped her find her footing. "I'm well, thank you. I was wondering if you might be free for dinner sometime this week. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." "Of course," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Would Thursday work for you?" His immediate acceptance caught her off guard. After weeks of wondering whether he had any interest in spending time with her, his easy agreement to dinner felt almost anticlimactic. Yet this response was entirely consistent with his character. He evaluated her invitation on its merits and responded accordingly, without games or artificial scarcity. They made arrangements to meet at a quiet restaurant known for excellent food and conversation rather than scene-making. Another choice that reflected Marcus's priorities. As Victoria hung up the phone, she realized she felt nervous about this dinner in a way she hadn't felt nervous about a date in years. Thursday evening found Victoria arriving at the restaurant with unusual punctuality, having changed outfits 3 times and spent far more time on her appearance than was typical for her. She had told herself this was simply a professional dinner. She did, in fact, have a business proposition to discuss with Marcus, but her behavior suggested her motivations were more complex than she was ready to acknowledge. Marcus arrived at the appointed time wearing an understated navy suit that managed to be both casual and sophisticated, embodying his approach to most things in life. He greeted Victoria with the same warm courtesy that characterized all their interactions, inquiring about her day and commenting on the restaurant's atmosphere without any of the performative charm that typically accompanied dinner dates. As they settled into their table and ordered wine, Victoria found herself studying Marcus's face, trying to read any sign of romantic interest or availability. His attention seemed focused entirely on their conversation, with no obvious agenda beyond enjoying the evening's company. "You mentioned having something to discuss," Marcus said after they had ordered their meals. "I'm curious to hear what you're thinking about." Victoria had prepared a business proposition about potential collaboration between their companies, but sitting across from Marcus in the intimate lighting of the restaurant, she found herself abandoning her planned script in favor of honesty. "Actually," she said, taking a sip of wine for courage, "I think I asked you to dinner under false pretenses. Yes, there are potential business synergies we could explore, but that's not really why I called you." Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly, his expression curious but not uncomfortable. "Oh? I've been thinking about our conversations and I realize I wanted to spend more time with you, not for networking or business purposes, but because I genuinely enjoy your company." The admission hung in the air between them. Victoria's vulnerability laid bare in a way that felt both terrifying and liberating. She had never been so direct about her personal interest in a man, having always relied on subtlety and suggestion to communicate romantic availability. Marcus considered her words with the same thoughtful attention he gave to everything, neither rushing to respond nor appearing uncomfortable with her honesty. When he spoke, his voice carried warmth without pity or condescension. "I'm flattered, Victoria. I've enjoyed our time together as well. You're intelligent, accomplished, and engaging company. I appreciate your directness in telling me this." The pause that followed was not uncomfortable, but it was significant. Victoria found herself holding her breath slightly, waiting for the rest of his response. "I have to be honest with you," Marcus continued. "I'm not currently looking for a romantic relationship. It's not about you specifically. You're a remarkable woman. It's about where I am in my life right now and what I'm focused on." Victoria felt a complex mixture of disappointment and respect for his straightforwardness. Another man might have let her down more gently but less clearly, leaving room for hope and continued pursuit. Marcus's direct honesty was kinder in the long run, even if it was more immediately disappointing.
"I appreciate your honesty," Victoria replied, surprised by how calm her voice sounded.
"Can I ask why, if you don't mind the question?" Marcus smiled slightly, appreciating her directness in return. "I spent several years rebuilding myself from the ground up, learning to be complete without needing external validation or romantic fulfillment. I've reached a place where I'm genuinely happy being alone, and I'm reluctant to compromise that independence unless I meet someone who adds to my life rather than filling a perceived gap." "And I don't meet that criteria?" Victoria asked, not defensively but with genuine curiosity. "It's not about criteria," Marcus replied. "It's about timing and readiness. I'm not closed to the possibility of a relationship, but I'm also not actively seeking one. When and if I meet someone who makes me want to share my life rather than simply enhance it, I'll know." His explanation was both personal and philosophical, revealing the depth of thought he had given to questions of love and partnership. Victoria found herself respecting his position, even as she felt disappointed by its implications for her. "That's a very evolved perspective," she said. "Most people seek relationships to complete themselves rather than to share an already complete life." "I used to be one of those people," Marcus admitted. "It didn't serve me well, and it certainly didn't serve the women I dated well. I decided I'd rather be alone and whole than coupled and incomplete." The conversation that followed was perhaps the most honest discussion about love and relationships that Victoria had ever had with a man. Marcus spoke about his transformation from neediness to self-sufficiency, about the difference between loneliness and solitude, about the challenge of maintaining independence while remaining open to connection. Victoria found herself sharing her own experiences with relationships and power, admitting how strange it felt to be in the position of pursuing rather than being pursued, how Marcus's self-possession had challenged her assumptions about male-female dynamics. "I've spent my career being the selector," she confessed. "Men compete for my attention, and I choose whether to grant it. With you, I found myself wanting your approval in a way that felt completely foreign. That's the natural response to encountering someone who doesn't need your approval," Marcus explained. "When someone is genuinely self-sufficient, they become attractive precisely because they don't require external validation. It's counterintuitive, but neediness repels while independence attracts." As their dinner plates were cleared and coffee was served, Victoria realized that despite being essentially rejected, she felt more engaged and stimulated than she had in months. Marcus's honesty had created space for authentic conversation that felt more intimate than most of her actual romantic relationships. "Can I ask you something else?" Victoria said as they prepared to leave the restaurant. "Of course. If you're not interested in dating me, why did you agree to have dinner tonight?" "You must have suspected this wasn't entirely professional," Marcus smiled. The first time all evening his carefully composed demeanor had cracked slightly. "I was curious to see what you wanted to discuss, and I hoped we might be able to maintain a friendship even if romance wasn't in the cards." "Friendship?" Victoria repeated, testing the word. "I don't think I've ever been friends with a man I was attracted to." "It's possible," Marcus assured her, "but it requires both people to be honest about their motivations and boundaries." As they walked out into the cool evening air, Victoria felt a strange sense of completion despite the conversation not ending as she had hoped. Marcus had treated her with respect and honesty, qualities that were rarer in her experience than romantic interest. "Thank you for dinner," Marcus said as they waited for their respective cars. "And for being direct about your feelings. I know that wasn't easy. Thank you for being honest in return," Victoria replied. "It's refreshing, even when the answer isn't what I wanted to hear." They parted with a handshake rather than a hug, maintaining the appropriate boundaries that Marcus had established. As Victoria watched him drive away, she realized she felt more respect for him than disappointment about his rejection. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Victoria and Marcus began developing a genuine friendship. Without the complications of romantic pursuit clouding their interactions, they were able to appreciate each other's company and intelligence without hidden agendas. They began meeting occasionally for coffee or lunch, discussing art, business, philosophy, and current events with the kind of intellectual honesty that was rare in both their social circles. Victoria found Marcus's perspectives challenging and stimulating, while Marcus appreciated Victoria's sharp insights and industry knowledge. This friendship allowed Victoria to observe the Machiavellian law in action from a unique vantage point. She watched other women encounter Marcus at social events, saw their initial confidence give way to confusion, and then intense interest as they experienced his polite disregard for their usual power dynamics. At a charity gala they both attended, Victoria observed a prominent socialite named Catherine Morrison approach Marcus with the kind of predatory confidence that typically reduced men to stammering admirers. Catherine was younger than Victoria, breathtakingly beautiful, and inherited enough wealth to make most men eager to please her. "You're Marcus Chen," Catherine said, sliding up beside him at the bar. "I've heard fascinating things about your work." Marcus turned to acknowledge her with the same polite attention he showed everyone. "Thank you. And you are?" "Catherine Morrison. My family's foundation has been following developments in artificial intelligence with great interest." Victoria watched the interaction unfold from across the room, fascinated to see whether Marcus's response to Catherine would be different from his response to her own approaches. She quickly realized it was identical. Polite engagement without any hint of special interest or availability. Catherine clearly expected her beauty and status to create immediate impact, but Marcus treated her exactly as he would treat anyone else, with respect, but without the slightest indication that her attractiveness affected him. This complete immunity to her usual advantages left Catherine noticeably off balance. "Perhaps we could discuss potential collaboration between your company and our foundation," Catherine suggested, moving slightly closer to Marcus in a way that typically had magnetic effects on men. "I'd be happy to put you in touch with our public relations director," Marcus replied, maintaining the same physical distance he had established initially. "She handles all our foundation partnerships." The redirect was polite but definitive. Marcus was willing to facilitate a business connection but showed no interest in handling the matter personally. For Catherine, who was accustomed to men volunteering to personally manage any interaction with her, this professional boundary felt like rejection. Victoria watched Catherine make several more attempts to capture Marcus's attention throughout the evening, each met with the same courteous but disinterested response. By the end of the gala, Catherine was displaying clear signs of frustration and confusion, unable to understand why her usual tactics had proven ineffective. "She's not used to men who don't chase," Victoria commented to Marcus as they shared a taxi after the event. "I noticed she seemed frustrated," Marcus replied, "but I'm not sure why. I was perfectly polite to her." His genuine confusion about Catherine's reaction illustrated a crucial point about the Machiavellian law. It worked most effectively when it was authentic rather than calculated. Marcus wasn't deliberately playing hard to get. He simply had no interest in pursuing women who brought nothing to the interaction beyond physical beauty and social status. This authentic disinterest was far more powerful than any strategic game playing could have been. Catherine, like Victoria before her, found herself thinking about Marcus precisely because he had shown no special interest in thinking about her. Over the following months, Victoria observed similar patterns repeated with various women in their social circle. Marcus's genuine self-sufficiency and disinterest in romantic conquest made him increasingly attractive to women who were accustomed to being pursued. The more he failed to chase, the more he was chosen by women seeking the validation of his attention. The irony was not lost on Victoria that Marcus, who had spent years learning not to need external validation, had become the most sought-after source of validation in their social environment. Women competed for his attention precisely because he didn't offer it freely, valued his approval precisely because he didn't seek theirs in return. During one of their regular coffee meetings, Victoria broached this topic directly. "You realize you've become quite the catch among the women in our circle?" Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "Have I? I hadn't noticed. Catherine Morrison has asked me about you 3 times since the gala. Amanda Richardson mentioned you at least twice at last week's board meeting. Even Sarah Chen, no relation I assume, has been making inquiries about your availability. That's unexpected, Marcus replied, seeming more puzzled than pleased by this information. I hope they don't think I was encouraging that interest. This reaction perfectly illustrated the principle underlying the Machiavellian law. Marcus's attractiveness to these women stemmed precisely from his lack of awareness or interest in being attractive to them. He hadn't encouraged their interest because he genuinely hadn't noticed it, and this obliviousness made him even more appealing. You don't seem particularly excited about having multiple accomplished, beautiful women interested in you, Victoria observed. Should I be? Marcus asked. Interest based on scarcity or challenge doesn't seem like the foundation for anything meaningful. If someone is attracted to me primarily because I'm not paying attention to them, what happens when that dynamic changes? His analysis was remarkably sophisticated for someone who claimed not to understand the romantic dynamics swirling around him. Marcus had intuitively grasped that attraction based solely on his unavailability was ultimately hollow, unlikely to develop into the kind of deep connection he had described wanting. So what kind of attraction would interest you? Victoria asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. Marcus considered the question carefully before responding. I suppose I'd want someone who is attracted to who I actually am rather than how I make them feel about themselves. Someone who enhances my life through their presence rather than simply filling time or providing validation. That's a high standard, Victoria noted. Is it? Marcus replied. It seems like the minimum requirement for a healthy relationship. Two complete people choosing to share their completeness rather than two incomplete people trying to use each other to fill their gaps. The conversation left Victoria thinking about her own romantic history and motivations. She realized that much of her attraction to Marcus had initially been based on the challenge he represented, rather than genuine compatibility or shared values. While she had come to appreciate his character and intelligence, her initial interest had been sparked by his unavailability. This self-awareness led to an important shift in Victoria's approach to relationships more generally. She began evaluating potential partners based on their authentic qualities rather than their level of pursuit or availability. The influence of observing Marcus's approach to life had extended beyond her feelings about him to her entire framework for understanding attraction and connection. Months passed with Marcus remaining genuinely single by choice, turning down dates and romantic opportunities with the same polite consistency he showed in all his interactions. He attended social events, engaged in interesting conversations, and maintained his various friendships without any apparent loneliness or dissatisfaction with his solitary status. This contentment with solitude was perhaps the most attractive quality of all to the women who encountered him. In a culture where single people were often viewed as incomplete or actively searching, Marcus's genuine satisfaction with his own company suggested a level of self-knowledge and inner security that was deeply appealing. The transformation that had begun years earlier with Marcus's deliberate self-destruction and reconstruction had reached its intended destination. He had become genuinely self-sufficient, no longer needing external validation or romantic completion to feel whole and satisfied. This inner completeness radiated outward, attracting people who recognized and valued authentic self-possession. The final demonstration of the Machiavellian law came at Victoria's birthday party, an elegant affair she hosted in her penthouse apartment for 50 of her closest friends and professional associates. Marcus attended as a friend, arriving with a thoughtful gift, a rare first edition of a philosophy book she had mentioned admiring months earlier. The gesture was perfectly calibrated, meaningful enough to show genuine friendship and attention, but not romantic enough to suggest inappropriate feelings or create awkwardness given their established boundaries. Victoria found herself touched by the thoughtfulness while appreciating the clear appropriateness of the gift. Throughout the evening, Victoria watched Marcus navigate the party with his characteristic grace and authenticity. He engaged in substantive conversations with people who interested him, politely excused himself from interactions that didn't, and showed no particular awareness of the female attention focused on him. At least 6 different women found excuses to approach him throughout the evening, each employing different strategies to capture his interest. Some tried intellectual engagement, others used humor. Still others relied on physical proximity and subtle touching. Marcus responded to all of them with the same friendly courtesy, engaging authentically, but showing no special interest in any particular person. Near the end of the evening, as guests were beginning to depart, Victoria found herself standing with Marcus on her apartment's terrace, looking out over the city lights. The party had been a success, and she felt the satisfaction that came from bringing together interesting people for meaningful connection. "Thank you for coming," she said to Marcus. "And for the book. It was perfect." "I'm glad you liked it," Marcus replied. "The party was excellent." You have a gift for creating environments where people can actually connect rather than just networking. As they stood in comfortable silence, Victoria realized how much their friendship had enriched her life. Marcus had introduced her to a different way of existing in the world, more authentic, less performative, grounded in genuine self-knowledge rather than external validation. "Can I tell you something?" Victoria said eventually. "Of course. When I first met you, I was attracted to you primarily because you weren't interested in me. It felt like a challenge, a puzzle to solve." Marcus smiled slightly. "I suspected as much. But getting to know you as a friend has taught me something important about attraction and relationships. The qualities that make you genuinely appealing, your authenticity, your self-knowledge, your contentment with yourself, those have nothing to do with your availability or lack thereof." "That's very insightful," Marcus replied. "I think the same principle applies to most human interactions. People are drawn to authenticity and self-possession, whether in friendship, business, or romance. The irony is that the less you need people's approval, the more they want to give it to you."
"It's not really ironic," Marcus said thoughtfully.
People value what's rare and genuine. In a world full of people desperately seeking validation, someone who doesn't need it stands out. As the evening wound down and Marcus prepared to leave, Victoria felt a deep sense of gratitude for their friendship and the lessons it had taught her. Marcus had shown her that true attractiveness came from inner completeness rather than external positioning, that authentic self-possession was more magnetic than any strategy or game. The Machiavellian law, she realized, wasn't really about manipulation or calculated unavailability. It was about the natural human response to encountering someone who was genuinely complete within themselves, who offered connection from a position of abundance rather than neediness. Marcus had destroyed his weak, needy, validation-seeking self so thoroughly that he had become essentially invulnerable to the opinions and rejections of others. This invulnerability wasn't armor against the world. It was the natural result of having built his sense of self-worth from internal rather than external sources. As Victoria watched Marcus's taxi disappear into the Manhattan traffic, she understood that she had witnessed something rare and valuable. A human being who had achieved genuine self-mastery. The fact that this self-mastery made him attractive to others was merely a byproduct, not the goal. Marcus had pursued wholeness for its own sake, and the external rewards had followed naturally. The lesson was clear. Men who don't chase are chosen not because of any strategic calculation, but because their lack of neediness signals a level of self-possession that others find irresistibly attractive. The man who destroys his weak self becomes invulnerable to external destruction because he no longer depends on others for his sense of identity and worth. In the end, the Machiavellian law was really about the timeless principle that strength attracts while weakness repels, that completeness draws people in while neediness drives them away. Marcus had embodied this principle so completely that he had become a living demonstration of its power, attracting others precisely because he needed nothing from them. The transformation from weakness to strength, from neediness to self-sufficiency, from external validation to inner security. This was the true heart of the Machiavellian law. It wasn't about games or manipulation, but about becoming genuinely worthy of the respect and attraction one desired. And in becoming worthy, one often discovered that the external validation once desperately sought was no longer necessary for happiness or fulfillment. Marcus had found something more valuable than romantic conquest or social approval. He had found himself. And in finding himself, he had become the kind of person others naturally wanted to find as well. The law was complete, the principle proven, the transformation achieved. The man who had destroyed his weak self had indeed become indestructible, not through armor or defensiveness, but through the simple, profound strength of being authentically and completely himself.